Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Mount Angel. I'm Abbot Jeremy, the abbot of this monastery, and I'm very happy that we can be together here at Mount Angel for this lecture for Dr. Maryanne Wolf. This lecture is sponsored by the Mount Angel Institute at Mount Angel Abbey. The Mount Angel Institute has as its mission the sharing of the rich ways of monastic life with the church and the world, and that's exactly what's happening here. We've invited Dr. Maryanne to be here to talk to us about the monastic value, which overlaps with human values of deep and careful reading. And so we're very happy to offer you this lecture today. And with a proper introduction, I've invited the director of the library, this beautiful building that we're in, Dr. Brian Moran, to introduce Dr. Wolf.
Thank you, Abbot. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Moran, the library director here at Mount Angel Abbey Library, and it was about 2 years ago that I sent an email to Maryanne, and I wasn't expecting anything, just that she has a lot on her plate, but she said, yes, I would like to come to Mount Angel Abbey, and so today is the day, and so thank you so much for joining us. But I thought I would start with her biography. So, Maryanne Wolf is a scholar, teacher, and advocate for children and literacy around the world. She is the director of the Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice at UCLA in the School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA, and the former John DiBaggio Professor of Citizenship and Public Service at Tufts University. She has authored over 170 scientific publications, Proust and the Squid, The Story of Science of the Reading Brain, 15 translations currently, published from HarperCollins in 2007, Tales of Literacy for the 21st Century, published by Oxford University Press in 2016, and Reader Come Home, The Reading Brain in a Digital Culture, 12 translations published from HarperCollins in 2018. She is the co-author with Martha Denkla of the RNA-RAS naming speed tests, a universal predictor of dyslexia, and the creator of the do I have that correct?
Fine.
An intervention program for all struggling readers. She has received multiple awards for her contributions to the neuroscience of reading, major awards from the International Dyslexia Association, and the Einstein Award from the Dyslexia Foundation for her dyslexia research, and the Walter Ong Award, and the Alfred Korzybski.
That's a new one.
That's a new one for me, sorry, award, for her work on the effects of different mediums on the intellectual development of the species. Most recently, she was elected a permanent member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. Please welcome Maryanne Wolf.
Thank you so much. I want to clap for you for coming on this beautiful day when you should be outside. If this be Oregon, Southern California, move over. I'm so happy to be with you and my friends, Ed and Brenda, who let me understand a piece of Oregon on the McKenzie River before I came. So I really come to you with great admiration and beginning affection for Oregon, which I never had before now, and now I don't want to leave already. But I'm here for a very special reason. And I'm for those of you who are part of the monastery, I'm giving 2 talks. And the beginning one is a general one for everybody. And I want all of you to be as excited and also cautionary tale about how reading is changing in this moment. So that's for all of you. And then tomorrow, for some of you who might be with me in the morning, I'm going to take half of this so that everybody has the same base, but I will apply it to Lectio Divina, which is a very special aspect of the monastic life, and that I have actually studied myself years ago and never thought anyone would invite me to speak about it. So it's a reciprocal gift that I have today to be with you. I come to you from UCLA, but I want to say one thing about it. when I look at written language, I see it in some ways differently from other people. I see it at a psychological and sociological level, but I see it at a political level too. I see literacy, and some of my colleagues in this audience from Eugene and Alexandria, we look at it as a basic human right. And so some of my work at the Vatican is about literacy and what it actually means to the trajectory of the life of every child. And after that trajectory, the trajectory in society. And also, I will add the species. Our species changes, and we'll come to Walter Ong, who I'm so grateful. It was one of the best awards. Of course, nobody in my family, who's Walter Ong? Why are you so excited about a Walter Ong award? But the reality is that, as you will see, it is a transformative invention of our species. Before, when we had, if you will, I looked at all of this as a hinge moment, but my thinking is actually beginning to change. I think we've already moved so much into the digital world, but Walter Ong was really interested in orality and the change from orality to a written culture, a literate culture. And I have been interested since this book called Proust. Proust is called Proust and the Squid, the story and science of the reading brain, but some people mistake it, including the president of my university, and introduced me as the author of Proust and the Octopus. Something that is still in my mind. But the reality is that we are in this great moment of change, and we don't understand it as quickly as it is changing us. In Walter Ong's time, when he was studying these changes, and he was really interested in what happens to the children who are steeped in both, I am too. I am still learning from Walter Ong. But this hinge moment, I believe, has changed into we are a digital culture. And what that means to us, in my perspective, has to be placed in terms of the development of what it does to the human brain. And as I said, it is changing this individual brain, but it's changing potentially the future of who we are. And it's really important that all of you, not just me, all of us think about what are those changes in our lives? Because it is not a binary. And every one of you, I just know every one of you are on a screen 2 to 10 hours a day. You don't even tell me you aren't, because that is who we are, especially in terms of the way we are bombarded with information. And we will talk about the difference between information, knowledge, and wisdom. That's a particularly important aspect of why I wanted to come to you, because there really are both promise and perils that we are experiencing. And in this audience, I can't do this in most, nobody knows who Nicholas of Cusa is except you. I mean, that's not totally true, but at least in my audience is a neuroscience, believe you me, no, but Nicholas who? You know, what lab? No, he had Brother Albert knows. But the reality was Nicholas of Cusa had this amazing ability to look and express something that's so important today. And that is, what do we do when I say it's not binary and that there are all these extraordinary advantages to living in a digital culture? That is a truth. But I'm going to be telling you another truth, which is those changes are deeply imprinted and being imprinted in the brains of our next generation and ourselves. And what Nicholas of Cusa said was, when we are confronted with this kind of conflicting coincidence of believable truths, we should take a stance of learned ignorance. And so I come to you in a stance of learning ignorance. I am learning. This is a frontier of knowledge, and I need you to know it's a frontier. I will be telling you studies that were just yesterday, literally. But that's not really going to give us the answers. It's asking the questions. What knowledge do we need to make choices, to discern? And when I say discern, I think almost half of the audience knows that I'm thinking of Henry Nouwen and discernment as one piece of what is required of us, whether we're in science or theology or education. And so I look at Nicholas of Cusa as a kind of guide. We have true advantages. We have true experiences that are changing the future of our species. But at the same time, we have things that are changing that we don't want to lose. And what are they? So the stance of learned ignorance is my way of introducing you to a concept that I think of almost, I always use the poet Adrienne Rich, who said, no one told us that we need to study our own lives as if learning natural history or music. And what she was telling us is what I'm trying to do in neuroscience. How do we study our own lives? And that tomorrow I will give you more of the poem. So it's those of you who come back to me, you'll get more of Adrienne Rich. The rest of you, I need you to know we're going to study together the human brain for 45 minutes. And we're going to be excited about it. You know, Travis and Ethan said, do you stand just behind the podium? No, because you will fall asleep when I talk about the brain. But I refuse to let you. And that is because this is you. And you have a brain that was never born to read. This is the first line in Proust and the Squid. And it sounds so simple. It's not simple at all. It means the brain had to change to accommodate. And sometimes I use the brains of people in my audience, but Brother Albert, even though your frontal lobes are so beautiful, I will try really hard to not do it because it takes too much time. But I love to use bald brains. His has got much too much hair, but the frontal lobe is good. But to show that what we're doing is we are creating an entire new circuit. And it's a circuit that didn't exist. We have circuits right here. All of these are networks, are circuitry that are genetically programmed. They were there from the start, and then all you have to do is put that brain in an environment and it will just unfold. Not so with reading. Written language has to create an entire new circuit connecting all of that. The reality is that when we create a brain, a reading brain, we have to make a circuit that didn't exist that is plastic. And plasticity has both an Achilles heel and an Achilles shield. What is so good about it is that you can have a circuit that can handle any written language, that we make all new circuits. And some of my colleagues are studying, especially in California, the differences in our bilingual and multilingual readers and what are the circuits that they use. And if you just look at the Chinese and Japanese kanji, you'll see these, this is, I'm making it bigger than what it really is, but you can imagine if you need 5,000 characters at 5th grade, you need more visual cortex, right? And so the circuit has to reflect the kind of requirements of that written language system. So we have, the Japanese are really fascinating because they really have two different kinds of circuits that are ongoing, kana and kanji. But then we have this English circuit, our alphabetic one, And even here we have some subtle and not so subtle differences in how Spanish, how more transparent languages are. They will change the circuit slightly. The signature, there's a pretty universal signature, but then you have the differences. Now, I use this example because there are differences also when the brain has different educational methods. And some of my colleagues here know that there are raging debates still about what are the best methods of teaching reading. And as a cognitive neuroscientist, I'm really trying very hard to help people see that we need both of the kinds of methods that are being done out there, but very systematically done. But what I would say to all teachers is that the circuit will reflect how you're teaching. But for us today, in this beautiful place, I'm interested in what happens when different mediums affect the way the circuit works. And to have you understand that, we need just to look very quickly at the first way the brain works when you just learn to read. So you are using all of these parts in the visual areas and the language areas and the frontal lobes of Brother Albert right up here. We're putting all this together as in a connected way, in a very connected way, so that, and this is what I need you to think of, we connect all these parts so that we can allocate time, attention, to what is loosely and often incorrectly called comprehension. Brother Albert and I were talking about comprehension before. Not everybody talks to me about comprehension. Leave it to the rare books library to start that as this first question to me. But the reality is, this time here, our children have to have this as automatically as possible so we can allocate time to an understanding of what lies beneath words. And my colleague 𝘗𝘦𝘢𝘥𝘪𝘁 is truly one of the experts on semantic development. It needs time. This set of processes that we call comprehension, I have referred to as deep reading, because comprehension is simply the tip of the iceberg. And what I want you to, almost invite you to understand, is that under that iceberg is a set of processes that are all interactive. And I use Thomas Aquinas because what I want you to realize is that at its best, this deep reading capacity is us, the reader, and the author in a dialogue. And when he says iron sharpens iron, that's what deep reading does. You are in a dialogue. And the few of you who have read my last book, Reader Come Home, Brian, you did, thank you very much, know that it wasn't chapters, they were letters, intentional letters, so that I realize we're on this frontier and I need the author and the reader to be in a dialogue. And the work of Proust is an amazing, many people aspire finally to read Proust, right? This is an aspiration for a lot of people. Almost no one read the book he wrote titled On Reading. I mean, it's really, there are thousands of pages and they don't read on reading. But I did. And in it, he said something amazing about what reading is. That fertile miracle of communication affected in solitude. We feel quite truly that our wisdom begins where that of the author leaves off. That's the acme that I'm wanting to lead you to today. That's the place. That's the reading sanctuary. And tomorrow we'll go more deeply into what Lectio Divina does to get us there. But I want all of you to know that that's where deep reading is convergent. But it converges through many more processes than these people who loosely use the term comprehension are thinking about. And so one of the things that I want you, and I won't go too deeply in here, but what I want to begin with in the processes is the act of eliciting our own knowledge, our own background knowledge. And this is important for those of you who are educators, especially those working with young children. We need, in that 0 to 5 period, we need to be building background knowledge. And even though this is not part of the talk, we are so reliant, our children, our young, are becoming so reliant on simply looking something up that they don't know what they don't know to look up. And so a piece of us that we hadn't anticipated is that it's not just knowing how to search, but knowing when to search, having the background knowledge. And that's based on what is called analogical reasoning. Human beings are born analogical thinkers. They are making a match between what they know and what that text says. And never before has this become more important in an age in which truth is assaulted in mis and disinformation. So analogical reasoning is really an essential aspect of all of us that we don't want to atrophy. And we can become so lazy, and that'll be a piece of this that I'll make you uncomfortable, not just children. But my colleague Alberto Manguel, who wrote this beautiful book that's being reissued, said this: reading is cumulative and proceeds with geometric progression. Each new reading builds upon what the reader has read before. That's us. You know, we are the sum of what we read. I think it was Joseph Epstein who said something, who are we? We are the sum of what we've read before. I add, not only are we the sum of what we read before, but we are the sum of how we read what we read before. And that's a piece that's like the prefatory statement to the next kind of process that is so important to emphasize in deep reading. And it's an unexpected one for many people. And that is the role of perspective taking, the role in which reading helps us leave who we are and try on the thoughts and feelings of others. And there's really different forms of empathy that are studied in neuroscience. There's the cognitive kind of empathy, that's the Machiavelli, to know the thoughts of others. And then there's I call it the Miss Marple kind of empathy, where she knows the motivation and she's thinking not just of what a person thinks, but what a person feels that motivates their behavior. And so perspective taking is one of the really most important and often neglected aspects of comprehension, because what we're doing is we are entering, if you will, the consciousness of others. And those of you who, like Abbot Jeremy, know the work of Father John Dunn, and I will speak more of that tomorrow, but I will use his theological metaphor of passing over. And what he suggested, and we would have these long talks about this, is that the kind of reading that I want all of us to preserve is the kind that we literally pass over from our perspective into the thoughts and feelings of another, and then come back enriched, come back changed. And his concept of passing over is, for me, one of the most important ones. Another is by Martha Nussbaum, the philosopher, who really talked about empathy as the laboratory for the moral imagination. Right now, in Milano, at Catholic University, the Festival of the Soul just ended. And one of the purposes for having this was to ask people in the arts and the sciences to think about, where is this compassionate imagination going in this moment of divisiveness? And can reading be one of the best of antidotes for our children and ourselves? Because we are becoming in a certain sense, we are reverting to the childhood version of egocentrism that my colleagues would have studied under Piaget, right? This is a reversion. Leave it to the rare books librarian to start that as this first question to me. But the reality is, this time here, our children have to have this as automatically as possible so we can allocate time to an understanding of what lies beneath words. And my colleague 𝘙𝘬𝘦 is truly one of the experts on semantic development. It needs time. This set of processes that we call comprehension, I have referred to as deep reading, because comprehension is simply the tip of the iceberg. And what I want you to, almost invite you to understand, is that under that iceberg is a set of processes that are all interactive. And I use Thomas Aquinas because what I want you to realize is that at its best, this deep reading capacity is us, the reader, and the author in a dialogue. And when he says iron sharpens iron, that's what deep reading does. You are in a dialogue. And the few of you who have read my last book, Reader Come Home, Brian, you did, thank you very much, know that it wasn't chapters, they were letters, intentional letters, so that I realize we're on this frontier and I need the author and the reader to be in a dialogue. And the work of Proust is an amazing, many people aspire finally to read Proust, right? This is an aspiration for a lot of people. Almost no one read the book he wrote titled On Reading. I mean, it's really, there are thousands of pages and they don't read on reading. But I did. And in it, he said something amazing about what reading is. That fertile miracle of communication affected in solitude. We feel quite truly that our wisdom begins where that of the author leaves off. That's the acme that I'm wanting to lead you to today. That's the place. That's the reading sanctuary. And tomorrow we'll go more deeply into what Lectio Divina does to get us there. But I want all of you to know that that's where deep reading is convergent. But it converges through many more processes than these people who loosely use the term comprehension are thinking about. And so one of the things that I want you, and I won't go too deeply in here, but what I want to begin with in the processes is the act of eliciting our own knowledge, our own background knowledge. And this is important for those of you who are educators, especially those working with young children. We need, in that 0 to 5 period, we need to be building background knowledge. And even though this is not part of the talk, we are so reliant, our children are young, are becoming so reliant on simply looking something up that they don't know what they don't know to look up. And so a piece of us that we hadn't anticipated is that it's not just knowing how to search, but knowing when to search, having the background knowledge. And that's based on what is called analogical reasoning. Human beings are born analogical thinkers. They are making a match between what they know and what that text says. And never before has this become more important in an age in which truth is assaulted in mis and disinformation. So analogical reasoning is really an essential aspect of all of us that we don't want to atrophy. And we can become so lazy, and that'll be a piece of this that I'll make you uncomfortable, not just children. But my colleague Alberto Manguel, who wrote this beautiful book that's being reissued, said this: reading is cumulative and proceeds with geometric progression. Each new reading builds upon what the reader has read before. That's us. You know, we are the sum of what we read. I think it was Joseph Epstein who said something, who are we? We are the sum of what we've read before. I add, not only are we the sum of what we read before, but we are the sum of how we read what we read before. And that's a piece that's like the prefatory statement to the next kind of process that is so important to emphasize in deep reading. And it's an unexpected one for many people. And that is the role of perspective taking, the role in which reading helps us leave who we are and try on the thoughts and feelings of others. And there's really different forms of empathy that are studied in neuroscience. There's the cognitive kind of empathy, that's the Machiavelli, to know the thoughts of others. And then there's I call it the Miss Marple kind of empathy, where she knows the motivation and she's thinking not just of what a person thinks, but what a person feels that motivates their behavior. And so perspective taking is one of the really most important and often neglected aspects of comprehension, because what we're doing is we are entering, if you will, the consciousness of others. And those of you who, like Abbot Jeremy, know the work of Father John Donne, and I will speak more of that tomorrow, but I will use his theological metaphor of passing over. And what he suggested, and we would have these long talks about this, is that the kind of reading that I want all of us to preserve is the kind that we literally pass over from our perspective into the thoughts and feelings of another, and then come back enriched, come back changed. And his concept of passing over is, for me, one of the most important ones. Another is by Martha Nussbaum, the philosopher, who really talked about empathy as the laboratory for the moral imagination. Right now, in Milano, at Catholic University, the Festival of the Soul just ended. And one of the purposes for having this was to ask people in the arts and the sciences to think about, where is this compassionate imagination going in this moment of divisiveness? And can reading be one of the best of antidotes for our children and ourselves? Because we are becoming, in a certain sense, we are reverting to the childhood version of egocentrism that my colleagues would have studied under Piaget, right? This is a reversion. We are losing our compassionate imagination. And when we do that, we have lost something so precious. And the Nobel Prize-winning novelist said that the novel, fiction, reading, is the closest we ever get to mental telepathy. That's the most beautiful line. I just felt like, how many of us are so locked into our daily lives and all the minutia, the geese, the minutia that are attacking our ankles every day of things we have to do, and we forget who other is. And I use this wonderful conversation. Will this innovation or this form of reading disrupt or diminish? That's really what I want to know. And when I want and have beginning answers, I do studies. I write books with letters that are asking you, those who will come after us in the next generation, be aware we need so much more knowledge about what is disrupted in our reading brains. Now, my colleague at UCLA, Patricia Greenfield, put it very simply. She said, every medium has, this just keeps moving faster and faster. Am I getting a hint from above? What is my time? I mean, really? Is this? Oh, well. Anyway, the fact is that just as we saw in the plasticity with different languages, there's plasticity with different mediums. And so the advantages, and there are many in the digital, is that it does help us to do various forms of handling massive information. And it hastens us, and we can get a lot of things done, it would seem, expeditiously. There's a whole literature on multitasking. By and large, that there is an advantage to multitasking, but then the question becomes, how much under the surface of that task have you gone when you multitask? So even that. But the problem that she saw early on, and that I have continued to see, is that the cost to print is that this weakness, or if you will, this way that to handle all that information causes us to read in a skimming fashion in such a way that we aren't giving time to the deep processes. So there are so many advantages and disadvantages to each of the mediums, but the real question that I have is, what is the purpose of the reading you are doing? If you are, like many of us, spending all this time on email, you are not, and I would say, you have my permission, absolutely don't use your deep reading processes. Use all of that skimming that you want to do. And there are many things that we, especially in education, we have all these journals and we have to do this, so we read it quickly first to see what we should go back and print out and read carefully, whether it's a contract. And then there's another whole area, which is the beauty, and I will come back to that. But the point that I'm trying to draw here is that the plasticity of this brain makes us have different possible uses according to the medium, and what are we doing with whatever's in front of us. And here I turn to T.S. Eliot, who asked the question, where is the wisdom lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge lost in information? And I put it the other way around. I think we are so bombarded with information, we are no longer assured of consolidation of knowledge. And that then endangers the bridge to insight, to contemplation, and ultimately to wisdom. So T.S. Eliot's question in reverse is something that a group of us in Europe, in Israel, in Australia, and in the United States, and in Canada are pursuing across the lifespan. We are gathering evidence, and not to, it's like Marcus Aurelius. Blame no one, but set the record straight. My job is to set the record straight about what are the changes that we're seeing in our young. So I'll only say the most recent right now from Singapore, Harvard, and McGill are looking at children from 0 to 8. And the question is, the amount of digital exposure, now this is correlational, and those of you, everyone here knows correlation is not causation, but it's a warning. And the correlation between digital exposure, amount of digital exposure in these kids from 0 to 8, and academic performance, and the executive attention processes at 8. So what's the relationship? What do you think? What?
Inverse.
Inverse. The more digital, the less academic performance. Are you an educator?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, you are. She knew it right away. And the worse performance on executive tasks, okay? The frontal lobe. Is he your husband?
Yes.
It's his frontal lobe that's endangered. So what we're seeing is in these studies, and there are studies that are happening all over the world. I told Brother Albert that I just testified to Norway because they were about to, are considering doing what Sweden erroneously did, which was to digitize all the books, right? And then they're seeing the performance of their kids fall down. And so Norway is saying, wait a minute. Well, of course, the Norwegians and the Swedes have their own issues, but we're not going to just blindly follow Sweden. So they had a commission, and with others in this group testifying about what is happening that we're noting in the differences in our infants 0 to 8, in our youth, and very importantly, in young adults. And the study that Brother Albert and I both criticize, but nevertheless, and it's being done again and again in different ways, nevertheless, you have to know the results. They did a meta-analysis, and the task simply was read the same thing in digital on a screen versus print, okay? And then they do comprehension questions, which is really our area of interest. And what they're finding is, educator, you tell me, were the kids, these are young adults, all right? And we're talking 171,000, all right? 17 years of studies. Were they better on print or digital in the comprehension questions? Okay, now I'm going to really, the last 2 years of the study would be digital natives. Now what?
Interesting.
Now tell me.
Because they don't have the experience in print, right, is what you're saying.
I'm not saying anything. I'm asking. Go for it.
I would still guess print better than this.
You are so right. You are so right. Not only are you right, they were even better than the ones before. And then the Israeli researcher Ackerman wanted to probe qualitatively and said, well, what do you perceive you're better in? And they said, oh, we're much better on the screen. We're much better. And then she probes, and they said, why do you think that? You know, not telling them that we are absolutely wrong. You have to be, interviewer bias cannot be interviewed. So, and they said, oh, well, of course, because we're so much faster. There is the problem for our species. Now look at this. Nobody's going to read that, right? This is your life. I made this slide on purpose, and it's really full of all these people who are studying it. It's wonderful, wonderful group. But it's saying we are so bombarded with information that what we do is skim. And skimming has become the absolute norm for so many of us. Me too. Brian and I discussed how I went back over my favorite book, one of my favorite books, Hermann Hesse's Magister Ludi, Glasperlenspiel, Glassbead Game, and I couldn't read it. I didn't want to read it. I questioned why the Nobel Prize Committee at the time. And it was like creosote in my brain. And what I was doing is what I tell other people not to be aware of. It was my dominant mode was bleeding over into my reading of novels, and my what was for me a absolute purpose of my life was, before I went neuroscience, I had several degrees in English literature, and I was becoming like everybody I was warning. And it then became clear to me that the eye movement people were absolutely right. I don't know, you can just examine yourself. I said this transcendental, no one told us to study our own lives. Well, I'm asking you to study yourself. And what I found was that I was just like, these studies are saying most of us do an F. Well, you could go sample here, come down, sample a little bit, and go down. Or, and I'm a Z, you go here and then you word spot. All the way down, you get, you tick, then come down, and of course you read the conclusion, and that's what we do, not just for the page, but for the articles. We're now seeing that in studies of literature, that especially our graduate students are doing almost like a Z to the entire article. They get the top, they do a little bit. Methods be damned. I'm sorry, history, the whole history of whatever that, and then they go to the conclusion. And that's what we're seeing even in our sophisticated graduate students. But I ask it of you, how are you reading? Are you actually bleeding over? And if so, what are the things that we can learn from others about antidotes to that? And Italo Calvino, in his 6 essays for the next millennium, said this. It seemed, and he said this before today. I mean, I can't even imagine what he would say today. It seems to me that a pestilence has struck the human race in its most distinctive faculty of afflicting language, revealing itself as a loss of cognition, think deep reading, that tends to level out all expression into the most generic, anonymous, extinguishing the spark that shoots out from the collision of words and thoughts. We can't lose this. This is the essence. Those of you who have studied literature, philosophy, theology, there is a life below words. And tomorrow I will have at least a part of my time with you talking about the life below words in lectio divina. Sacred text, how can we treat it in the most superfluous of ways? And yet everything is bleeding over. And so we have to ask, what are the implications for the reader if that's where we're headed? First, we already know this is happening everywhere, and I think, this is not a political statement, this is a cognitive statement. So many of the people who are engaged in divisiveness have only silos of the familiar that they go to every night. They then, the term confirmatory bias, that supports whatever small, narrow lens of thinking they have because they're not perspective taking. They're not thinking of other because the other in a silo has become what Marilyn Robinson said, the sinister other. External platforms, disinformation, all of you know all that's going on. But most important from my standpoint is that there will be less time devoted to complexity. We live in a complex world. And without saying anything about the world of politics, I will say that the idea that policy can be made on a Twitter, on a tweet, this is unconscionable from a cognitive neuroscience. And politics, I will use the Greek politics with small p, for the people. We can't have our people having complex, and is there anything more complex right now than our world, right this minute, whether we're talking about the earth? We really have to understand we must grasp complexity using these very sophisticated processes that we developed for a long time. We worked for those processes. And then this is another piece to what I am always so concerned about, and that's the beauty of written language. Walter Ong talks so much about orality and its beauty and also the beauty of written language, but is there ever a more amazing vehicle for the transmission, not just the transmission, the articulation of our best thoughts through language? And I have a quote. Ed, you may help me on this. It's Flaubert, but he said, language is that, that broken kettle that we beat, rhythm forbears to dance, all the while we want to make music that will make the stars sing. Something like that. I can't get it, but I'll remember it tonight and give it to the rest of you tomorrow. But that's written language. That's beauty, and that's what authors try their hardest to do. Every one of you write, and some of you write, and I look at Brenda, I just heard some things she wrote. These things are so important to us. We must not lose beauty. Beauty is another neglected aspect of deep reading, the perception of beauty. And even though I won't even talk about it tomorrow, one of the things that I read for me to prepare for you was Joseph Pieper's book, Happiness and Contemplation. And it was all about the perception of beauty. Those of you who know Jacques Maritain, Joseph Pieper, anyway, that's because of my Notre Dame tradition. But now for my educators, I want to tell the rest of them, because you already know this, and my colleagues there, you already know this, but the rest of you don't. It is an absolutely, I'm wordless at the idea that only 1/3 of our 8th graders and 4th graders can read at a deep reading level. They can't read in the way that we as a species have developed. And that has so many different factors. But we must not just even stop there. Our children of color are not reaching basic level at grade 4. This isn't just California. This isn't Oregon. And my colleagues are telling me it's everywhere. But the reality is, what does it mean if only 1/3 of our population is able to use critical analysis and empathy? I'm not saying that that is lost if you're lost at 8th grade. And the beauty of the educational system is we never give up. And I'm so happy to work in a field where there is such hope, but there is this reality. If critical analysis and empathy are atrophying, there is going to be less attention to who others are, and we will become steadily more divisive because we have enemies now. Instead of, the days in which, okay, we have difference of opinion, but now it's as if it's the source of enmity. And this is something that I truly believe that reading can help us, and we must not become as susceptible as we are becoming to false information. Because false information, and I had this conversation with 2 of my friends today, the Nuremberg trials had one of Hitler's major people tell a United States psychiatrist right before the trials why Germany, this unbelievable, cultivated group of people, fell prey. And he said, it can happen anywhere. All you do is you teach that they are the Übermensch. They're great. But their greatness is being taken away by others. And so we see the insidious, the absolute evil of considering others as enemy. And that, in turn, he said, the third was very Hitlerian. You just make sure everybody who disagrees is eliminated and called a traitor. We must learn that critical analysis in a society is essential. And I will say, as a neuroscientist, I think we're in a crisis. I look at our young. They are not learning at a level that we need them to learn. I look at our adults, and we are Z and Fing our way through our skimmed information that we're bombarded by. It's one thing to say that we have a lot of information, but what do we do with it? How best do we handle that bombardment? And bombarded we are. Skimming is a defense mechanism. I don't blame anybody for skimming. But what I do is ask, what's your purpose? Ask yourself that purpose before. And the Pope Francis had said this in an essay, which I loved. He quoted a poem, "Where the danger is also grows the saving power." That's the genius in the human story. There's always a way to escape destruction. Where humankind has to act is precisely there. In the threat itself, that is where the door opens. And I have only 5 minutes, and I'm going to open that door for you. And I'm going to say it by saying that the lessons I'm getting are an emphasis on preserving as we expand. And the work for those of you in the public, this is especially for the public educators, we can do a better job of ensuring that our children read with print for 10 years, learn deep reading, and simultaneously learn coding and programming. I am in love with all the things that technology can do right. We must never lose that, but we must never lose deep reading, and we must have teachers who can do both. And again, Martha Nussbaum, the philosopher, said it would be catastrophic to become a nation of technically competent people who have lost the ability to think critically, to examine themselves, and to respect the humanity and diversity of others. The antidote, I believe, goes back to Nicholas of Cusa. This is Alberto Manguel. And he said, and he quoted Kipling's story, "The Eye of Allah," "For the pain of the soul, there is outside of God's grace but one drug, and that is a man's craft, a human's craft, learning. That will propel the action of his own mind." I actually am ending with my teacher. I don't want to see Steve Pinker. Steve Pinker's my teacher, but he's not my real teacher. Those of you know Steve Pinker, he's an absolutely amazing, beautiful thinker, but I don't want to end with him. I want to end with Father Dunn. He said, "Wisdom is in a conjoining of knowing and loving." Wisdom is not contemplation alone, not action alone, but contemplation in action. And that's really how I want to leave you today. I want you to think, what is the purpose of all of your reading? Because reading is our best vehicle for knowledge, and knowledge is our best vehicle for wisdom. And I want that for you. And when Brian, I used to call him Dr. Moran, but after 2 years, it's down to Brian. But as I said to Brian, it is as much a gift to me as I can imagine to be able to talk about contemplation to a group who are dedicated to it. There are few people on this earth who do more service for humankind than those who contemplate and by their prayers help the rest of us, the rest of our world. So I truly say to you, I have to, I know I'm supposed to stop at 4:30, but do you mind if I read a quote from myself? That's so egocentric. I'm back to Piaget. It's like, oh my God. And so I actually, this was supposed to be the last slide. Why do you read? Why do I read? And the answer that I found is for myself is this, and it's an exercise for you to think how you would answer. I read both to find fresh reason to love this world and also to leave this world behind. To enter a space where I can glimpse what lies beyond my imagination, outside my knowledge, and my experience of life, to expand an ever truer, more beautiful understanding of a universe with God's footprints everywhere, and to lead a life based on this vision for my students and those who will follow. I ask you to answer it yourself. Godspeed to all of you. Thank you so much.